Chapter 8. German Women Oppose Nazi Education. 2. I told my friends of my talk with Frau Otto that morning, because this was their first visit to Nazi Germany, and I wanted to prepare them for the discussion which neither they nor I would ever forget, when we were made to realize the complexity of the situation that lay behind the daily decisions these German women were having to make. Our hostess welcomed us in the garden, and surprised my friends by saying, "One or two of the others have arrived, but they all come at different times and by different ways, so that we do not appear to be having any sort of meeting. One has come already for lunch. Another, who is the wife of our doctor, came with him on his visit to my old mother this morning and stayed behind, and 2 more will come in through the back garden." Then, turning to one of my friends with a smile, she said, "Thus it is in Germany today, when a few parents wish to meet to discuss their children. If you do not know Nazi Germany, you will find our ways very strange." "Well," said my friend, "I see now that only to stay at a hotel and to see the healthy and happy-looking Hitler Jugend and the young men in the labor camps is to get a very false picture of what this movement really stands for. That is why we are so grateful to have an opportunity this afternoon of meeting you and your friends, and to hear what difficulties German parents who are not Nazis are having to face." Most of them were Protestant, though 1 or 2 were Catholics, but all were united in their hatred of the Nazis, even though they held different points of view as to how the whole situation had arisen and how it was to be met. Their friendship was based on a common suffering, and a determination to try to find ways of preventing their children's minds being crippled by Nazi philosophy. They did not often meet as a group. It was dangerous, and one of their members was already in prison, but they gained strength from meeting in 2s and 3s, very rarely all together, to try and discuss their more recent problems. That afternoon they were obviously delighted to meet women from another country. Those who did not visit Germany then can scarcely realize how isolated the intelligent university women in Germany felt. They had no opportunity to visit England, and eagerly sought any chance of discussing their problems with those not affected by them. It often made me feel very humbled to find we were being appealed to for judgment on a situation they were handling with such courage and enterprise. At first our discussion turned on general lines, and then, as so often before, came the very direct question, "But how does it all look to you? Perhaps we do not see so clearly inside the whole situation. What would you do if you were in our position? It might help us to hear what you think is right. It is so confusing to us." "But," we said, "we just cannot picture ourselves without freedom in our country." It was with a note of bitterness one of them replied, "No, that I can well imagine. I know England, and realize how you cannot imagine it ever anything but free. But believe us, we had never seen anything in our history that would indicate that we should lose our freedom to this extent." Another German woman with a family of 4 joined in. "You know, if 2 years ago you had told me that we should be sitting in this room, realizing that a simple tea party like this meant running risks of arrest, and that to tell you we hate the government of this country and all its works might mean imprisonment, and that the subject we are going to discuss is the freedom to educate our children as we wish, I should have thought you were mad." "Surely, Frau Braun," said another mother, "it is not only a question of freedom to educate. It is a question of whether we can have our children brought up not only as Christians, but as civilized human beings." "Who could have thought indeed," said a Catholic mother, "that in Germany today Catholic and Protestant mothers would meet together to discuss the religious persecution of their children?" "Religious persecution," said my hostess, "seemed to us a thing that could not happen again. But our great mistake lay in our failure to see right at the beginning, when the party decided to persecute the Jews, that once persecution became part of its gospel, no one could say where it would stop. We were not quick enough to organize against the movement while it was still possible. I will tell you one reason why it all sounded fantastic. Because all its teaching seemed so dreary and shoddy, and we relied on the solid educational system of our country to prevent this sort of thing from thriving. And while we were so slow, and I will add, so tired after the last war and all the bad years that have followed, the Nazis gained such control over our lives that we woke up to find ourselves in chains. But, we asked, how many people in Germany are really behind the party? They looked at one another. Then one said, I should think in all about 40%, but, she added, it is very difficult to know. Yes, said a friend, but the real point is not just 40% or even 20%, but what kind of 40%? All the energy, enthusiasm, and strength of youth has at the moment been caught up in it. We have got to accept and try to understand how it was that people, even the young, broke away from Christian moral standards so easily. We are paying the price of some great failure here, and we have a very long road to travel before we regain freedom. God grant there is no war, for if that comes, then everything is lost, because the country must stand united if there is war, and then we shall not be able to struggle within the country or even within the church. At this point, the hostess said, we must not make this meeting too long, so perhaps we should discuss in particular the problems we have to face about the education of our children. Frau Wagner, I know you encourage your children to take a very strong line about false teaching. Will you open the discussion? Frau Wagner had 4 children, of whom the eldest, Walter and Friedrich, were aged 15 and 10. She herself had been a teacher before her marriage and had read history at the university. I think, she said, that the only thing to do is to follow the teaching very carefully, and at once point out to the children all that is not true. Therefore my children go over their history lessons with me and any other lessons where there is much propaganda, and I tell them what is just Nazi nonsense and what is real history. Of course, it has made trouble for the boys at school. The elder boy is fairly cautious, but the younger one is both daring and intelligent. The history master happens to be extremely stupid, so Friedrich always asks him difficult questions and does not hesitate to contradict him. Of course, they are both members of the Nazi youth, but the eldest one has been told by the headmaster that he is considered a very bad influence by his form master, and if he does not improve, he will probably be turned out of the Hitler Youth, and then he has no opportunity later to go to the university, which is his great ambition. I argue with myself that this is not fair, but I think we have got to stand outside this movement altogether, and if you once begin to compromise, then things become impossible. My husband is not quite sure I am right, but we can only follow our own conscience, and I do not argue that others should do the same. I have told Walter that he must make up his own mind how far he goes. I told him it may mean a very difficult future for him, and I do not want him to act as I think right if he is not convinced. I have also told him that naturally we remain just as much friends whatever he does, and that we only want him to make his own final judgment, and that I will give him, as far as I can, any information and knowledge to help him. I have not told him that if he is not allowed to go to the university here, I hope to send him to England or America, as that is not certain, and I think he should make up his own mind, knowing that it will be a hard road if he takes it. Friedrich, I do not worry about so much. He is still only 10, and he has it in him to go on fighting. Also, he is so good at his work and at his games that I think they cannot do much harm to him, even if he gets punished a lot. And we can only hope by the time he gets to a senior form, this madness will be out of Germany. Yes, but Frau Wagner, surely there is a risk you may run into danger by this policy. Of course, she said, that we cannot help. And I think it is a good thing that my husband is away from home on military duties, so that he does not get blamed. And if trouble comes, even if I go to prison, I think it will strengthen the boys, though I shall not be happy if I have to leave the little girls, as the youngest is only 6 years old. Very soon after this conversation, Frau Wagner went to prison, and Though all her friends made representations to get her out, she was not released for some time. A number of parents felt that Frau Wagner was right, and that they only wished they had as much courage. But, added one of them, it is also true that some children can stand this sort of thing better than others. My son, for instance, is rather shy and reserved, and though I think he is really brave, I do not believe he could fight constantly with his masters and not have his health affected. That makes it possible for me to put my point of view, said my hostess, because I take a very different one from Frau Wagner, and would like to tell you why. I think one of the worst effects of the whole Nazi youth movement is that our children no longer get any peace or quiet, and I dread to think the kind of people they will grow into if they are subject to this incessant thundering of propaganda all the time. Not only at school, but at all their other Hitler-Jugend activities, they never have time to reflect quietly as individuals. And if in addition, when they do come home, they meet at once with conflict and are urged to strife, I feel the effect on them will be disastrous. My husband and I have thought about it a great deal, and we have decided the greatest necessity for our children is that there should somehow be some space and time in their lives for them to grow. Therefore, we never discuss politics or the Nazis or their teaching unless the children ask. They know we belong to the confessional church, and at our family prayers we pray naturally for Pastor Niemöller and all those who strive to keep faithful. We also hope that we make the whole atmosphere of the house and the things we talk about and read something so different from the noise and the vulgarity of the Nazis that we think they will learn from it. Above all, we want them to feel they can breathe freely, and not feel themselves torn mentally and spiritually all the time. We hope that by this means they will be better prepared to fight later, for I agree with Frau Wagner. The younger generations must fight it out, but I long for my children to have some peace in which to grow before they begin the fight. We are doing a great deal to encourage their interest in and knowledge of music and art. This is a twofold idea. First, it takes them to saner and lovelier worlds than that they see around them, and so builds up their spiritual resources. And secondly, my husband says that if he can really teach them the history of art and how to judge, that also will help them to learn sound judgment, which they can apply to other things. And again they turned to us and said, "What would you do?" And again we did not know, and we could not believe such questions would ever come to us. At this, the headmistress broke in on the discussion, and went back to the question of strain on the children, saying she felt it really depended almost entirely on the temperament of the child. Of course, the children must not have any pressure put on them to struggle against the Nazi teachers, because it would only mean they would break in the end. On the other hand, she felt other children would find it a great release to talk over the things they learnt at school with their parents, and the creation of a world in which Nazism didn't exist, even if very peaceful, might cause a strain in another way. "In many ways, I think we have got to follow the child," she said, "and watching many of the girls, I find their reactions are very different indeed. It is so much easier with the girls, because the Nazis don't care so much about them, and their future is not at stake, as the Nazis have no future for them except that they should stop thinking and have large families. On the other hand," she said, "up to now, there have been many teachers in the schools who were not Nazi, and that was a help to the girls who were thinking, but I cannot say how it will be when so many of the teachers and heads of the girls' schools are going to be young Nazi gangsters." A few minutes later, we went into the small study, which had French windows. It was a warm autumn evening, and the view across the Bavarian mountains was one of the most lovely in this beautiful part of the country. One of the other mothers who had scarcely spoken approached me and said, "I wonder if I could talk to you alone. Frau Otto," referring to our hostess, "has asked me to stay for supper, and she says we may go into her little private room and talk while she remains here and talks with your two friends." Realizing that Frau Brunner looked very tired and had probably found the small room in which we had been discussing all throughout the afternoon very hot, I said, "Let's open the window and sit where we can see this lovely view of the mountains." "Oh, please do not," said Frau Brunner. You forget I dare not talk near an open window." "How stupid of me," I said, closing the French window again. "I am sorry." "I am glad you do not remember," she said. "It is a help to meet people who do not live all the time in fear." I realized as I looked at Frau Brunner that there was suffering of a much deeper kind on her face than on any of the others, and that she had already met tragedy. "Do you remember," she began, "you once met my husband? He had supper one night with Professor Kramer when he was visiting Berlin for a few days, and you were staying with the professor. He told me how much you liked some of his music. That is why I ask your help now." "Oh, yes, of course," I said. "I did not know you were his wife. In fact, I did not get your name quite clearly when you came into the room. But do tell me what has gone wrong, for I can see you are unhappy." For a moment she bit her lips and remained silent as she stared out of the window, through which the hills could be seen in the distance. Recovering herself with great effort, she said, "You know, of course, my husband is a Jew." "No, I had not the slightest idea. Am I wrong in thinking he was the son of a Lutheran pastor?" "Yes, that is quite right," she replied. "His grandfather became a Christian, and his eldest son was a Lutheran pastor. My husband is again the eldest son, but though they have been Christian now for 3 generations, my husband has had his permit taken away by the Nazi Ministry of Culture, so that he cannot sell any of his music or poetry in German except to Jews, and of course the Jews do not count him as one of them, since much of his writing and his music has Christian subjects. My husband has almost the greatest knowledge of religious music of anyone in Germany, and he has made a special study of Christian poetry. He is passionately fond of his country and feels himself entirely a German. I come from an old German family and have no Jewish blood in me anywhere, but he will have to get out of Germany, and I beg you to help us if you can. It is so urgent for his health, and of course we have 5 children, and cannot live very long if we do not earn." "It is of our children I would tell you," she went on, "because a most terrible thing has happened. The 2 eldest boys, one is 15 and the other 12, both joined the Hitler movement and became enthusiastic young Nazis. I felt from the beginning that it was partly fear about their father having Jewish blood in him that had made them such fanatical Nazis, but we thought it wiser to say nothing and just let them be free. Rudolf, the elder, got on well in the party and soon became one of the leaders in the school and was very happy. Then one day he came home in a terrible state. I did not know that any boy could be so angry, especially my own son, and I can only say he behaved as if he were mad. His brother explained that it had been found out that their father had Jewish blood, and poor Rudolf was insulted by one of the young masters in front of the school. He was no longer allowed to be a leader, and probably he would soon not be allowed to be in the Hitler Jugend at all. I could not help him by talking. He was just so mad with anger that I thought it was better to leave him alone. But I knew my husband would soon come in through the back garden, and I thought I had better warn him first what had happened, because he was very fond of the boy, as he was the only one in the family who was also a musician, and he and his father went to all the concerts and musical festivals together. They do not look alike at all, because the boy is very tall like my brother and very fair, and as you know, my husband is small and dark and not very strong. I walked into the garden, and when he came home and I told him, he just turned pale and said, "Is Rudolf alone?" I said, "I will call Margot out into the garden, as I think she is in the room." A few minutes afterwards I heard my husband say as he entered the sitting room, "Rudolf, I would speak with you." In another minute I heard a cry of dismay and anguish from my husband, which now haunts me whenever I am still. For Rudolf had struck him in the face with such violence that he fell to the ground and struck his head against the end of the sideboard. For a moment Frau Brunner could not go on with the story, and then, seeing the look of horror on my face, she hastily exclaimed, "Oh, believe me, Rudolf was mad. He is not like that. He could not have done it if he had not been mad. I rushed into the room and saw by his face he was mad. He ran past me and out of the front door while my husband lay on the floor unconscious with blood flowing from his head. It was impossible to prevent Margot and her younger brother Edward from seeing what had happened, and I think Edward, who is only 5 years old, will never get over the shock of it all. Margot, I think, is all right, because she is older and was so concerned about helping me look after her father that she had not time to think. But poor little Edward we found half an hour later, sitting on the staircase, hugging a toy and weeping bitterly. Anyhow, I got my husband to bed. The doctor came and he said the wound itself was not serious. But for many days after, my husband was in a despair I did not believe existed. When he slept, I was always afraid for the time he would wake again, because it was so terrible for him to remember what had happened. He is better now, and some Christian friends have done very much for him. But he has asked to see you, and he feels he must get out of the country and try to start a new life. He said at first that he would never be able to play again, but I have told him it will be better if we can only get away. I was so very happy yesterday, because all his life he had said he wanted to write some music of the passion, but that he would never have the courage to do it. But yesterday he said, "I think I could try to write some passion music." If you could help us get to England, there is still a chance for him and the children. "What happened to Rudolph?" I said. Rudolph did not come back that night, and I was terribly anxious because I dare not let the police know, and yet I feared he would do harm to himself. But early the next day my brother rang up to say he had arrived at their house, which is about half an hour's bus ride from here, and that he would stay there for a time. You see, my brother, like me, is an Aryan, and I must tell you he was very unhappy when I married my husband. But he has always been very friendly, and now he is really most kind. He says it is much better for Rudolph to live with them for a time, while we decide. Rudolph has told his uncle that he wants to leave school, change his name, and get right away from here, and then try to join the party again. He says, still in bitter anger, that he wants to help persecute the Jews because they have ruined his life. My brother is wise, and I only hope some day Rudolph will come back to us.